Hi students, welcome back to our next videos, this time on the topic of comparing social work in different places. Now this is going to be a key theme of our week together. We're going to be doing this all the time, but I want to investigate the idea of comparing. Is it okay to do? Why is it dangerous? Why is it difficult? So in this short video, I'll be asking you lots of questions to get you thinking. Let's start with the benefits of comparing. I guess I have to state the obvious, really. We're at an international seminar here. This is an international module, and you have the same experience at an international conference. It's impossible to not compare. If you've got somebody from a different country talking about their social work, you find yourself comparing automatically. This is part of my own biography. I was born in Britain, but I studied social work in Germany. And every day in my seminar room, I was asking myself, okay, this is how social work is in Germany. This is how we think about social work in Germany. Would it be the same in the UK? So we find ourselves doing it whether we like it or not. Now, I'm giving this course, this module with this title, because I find the topic of European and international social work really interesting. So I have a passion for it. I think it's potentially really interesting. So my first question for you in this session is why? Discuss with your partners, what are the benefits of comparing social work in different places? What benefits, what advantages can it bring us? So pause here and discuss that together. Well, I won't go through answers to that question. That's something that we can discuss when we see each other live in the coming days. I want to instead move on with the next question that I have to ask you, the dangers of comparing. Are there any dangers of comparative social work? So I have a passion for this, I have an enthusiasm for it, but should we say stop, be careful, this is a dangerous business to do? Think about it. Why? Why might comparing be problematic? What dangers are there? Stumbling blocks for us to trip us up in this exciting project, which we're so enthusiastic about. So once again, have a natter with your partners. See if you can come up with some different reasons why comparing is a dangerous, risky business to do. And pause here. Once again, I'm not going to answer that question directly. Hold on to the points you've come up with. I'll be posing very similar questions in the coming days. I want to instead ask a slightly different question. Now, these two questions, they overlap a little bit. I think comparative social work is difficult to do. It's a tricky business. I think it's hard to do well and it's very easy to do badly. So this is my next question for you to contemplate. Why is comparative social work difficult to do? Why is it difficult? Why is it tricky? I want you to make a list of the difficulties. Now, this time I am going to give you my reasons. So pause here, get down as many difficulties as you can before I give you mine. So have a pause. So I'm interested to know in what you came up with. I'm sure our lists overlap at least in part. I found it very easy to list difficulties here. There are so many. The first thing I should really stress is comparative social work has a relatively young literature base. So there's really been an intensification in this interest in the last few decades. Now, there were one or two early comparative studies. There's a famous one on social work education published in 1937. So it does have a history, and yet most of our comparative literature is fairly new. Maybe comparative social work has evolved in the last years parallel to comparative education and comparative social policy, both big areas since the 1990s. So it's something that's happening right now, but this is a young area of thinking about social work. As well as having a young literature base, it's worth stressing it's still quite skeletal. We don't have enough books on this. Okay, so even if you look in journals, there's a journal of comparative social work, but you'll see that there's a fairly limited number of direct comparisons of social work in different countries. You know, we do not have many studies so far. There's obviously a kind of a problem in terms of methodology. We don't have as many methods as some of our colleagues in other disciplines do. Our friends in social policy, our friends in education have the option of actually looking at the numbers. So they have quantitative research. For example, the famous PISA study measuring how children in different countries learn different stuff at school. Now you can actually get some numbers, some real hard statistics out of that comparison. Another example, social policy. We can measure people's pension. We can measure how much money they get if they're unemployed and how long they get that money for. So we don't really have number crunching options in our comparative social work as we do in other disciplines. That makes it a bit harder to do. More difficulties, we need considerable language skills. I can give you a nice anecdote here. If you're a non-German speaker, I've got a book here which I've got on my desk. You can see my little notes there to mark for interesting passages. This is by Christa Hasenclever, which is a lovely name. It sounds like she's from Fechter, Hasenclever. And the book has the title Jugendhilfe und Jugendgesetzgebung seit 1900. Now, if I was going to translate that into English, I'd have to live in Germany for about 10 years first. You know, even translating the title is really, really difficult. We don't use the same words to describe similar work in England and in Germany. So simply from a linguistic perspective alone, it's so difficult to do. And it's not just the language, it's not just the words, you need considerable intercultural competencies. So I find it interesting to compare British and German social work because these are the two social works I know best. But it really took me a while to be comfortable in German culture before I could actually think about reading those books and discussing them with colleagues. So you have to be quite culturally competent, interculturally competent as a researcher to be kind of mobile in both worlds. The trick is, of course, to get outside of your own system and see systems neutrally. Again, easier said than done. Each country has its own way of organising services. And actually my book is a nice German example. In Germany, services for children, young people and families are collectively considered to be one entity. And in German we call it Jugendhilfe. It's a bit confusing because we mean support and help for children, young people and families. So we have our own way of conceptualizing our system. And again, if you go to the library and get books on social work law, you can find that the government itself is shaping groups of services together as creating, in some sense, a system. But you tend to find your own country's system most natural. So if I would say to German social workers, actually what you call Jugendhilfe, that doesn't exist as a one-to-one equivalent in other countries. But they would look at me like I'm a little bit mad. But that is how it is. Each one of us has a different way of seeing our own social work system. And it's hard to get a neutral outsider's perspective. I've got so many difficulties on my difficulties slides, even more difficulties, guys. My next point here, the research takes longer. It takes exactly twice as long as a single country study. Why am I saying this? Maybe it's nice if I give a concrete example. I'm reading this book at the moment. Look at this, Social Work in Britain, 1950 to 1975. So it's only a 25-year period, but an important one for the Brits. So I'm reading this and I want to compare English social work history with German social work history. But look how big this book is. You know, I've got my markers in, but actually only on the first couple of chapters. This is going to be so much reading for me. And my reward when I finish this book, when I get to the end of the page 308, will then be to read a similar German social work history book, which will probably be even longer still. So it goes without saying, if you want to be an expert on comparative social work, you have twice as much work as being an expert on your own country. When I'm reading that book, I'm constantly asking myself, am I comparing like with like? This book will focus on child welfare, as does this book I showed you a moment ago. But in Germany, youth work is a part of child welfare. Germans see youth work as being part of child welfare social work, and Brits don't. So it's very, very hard to be actually looking at exactly the same thing. And a final point I want to stress, my work is a lonely business. I have no one who I can really discuss my work with. So yes, I can meet experts on British social work history, and yes, I can meet experts on German social work history, but can I meet somebody that actually knows both sets of history and can compare them together? Typically, the historians in each country won't know each other's social work professions' histories. So it's very, very difficult to really reflect on what you're doing. You have to be quite sure of yourself when you're comparing to actually persevere and persist with doing this project, which is actually so hard to do together with others. In other words, look at this, my difficulty slides. There's so many reasons why we should be careful and cautious in our enthusiasm for comparative social work. On the other hand, do hold on to that lovely list of advantages, of benefits you made at the start of this video. I think we can learn so much from comparing. I think it's worth the work, even if it's hard work. Well, let me come to a close for this video, but it actually continues with part 2, which you'll find separately. Let's move on to that. Thanks for listening, guys.